All right, good morning. Welcome in to the Out of Bounds Show, ESPN 105.9 The Zone, driven by your next Ford Explorer. Ford F-150 from Mack Hike Ford, I-55 North in Jackson. We're streaming live on the Out of Bounds radio app, and this interview is brought to you by Valteo Tequila. Try the Reposado. I've had the Blanco. It's excellent. 100% additive-free, 100% blue agave. Valteo, Blanco, and Reposado. And a guy who played quarterback in the state of Mississippi and now in Texas is behind Valteo Tequila. We want to welcome in Ed Werder, longtime ESPN NFL insider, and Ed joins us on the Farm Bureau Insurance guest line. Ed Werder, good morning. How are you?
I'm doing well, thanks. And I had my margarita last night, so interesting to see you're sponsored by a tequila.
So what is that place that you talk about that you say it's the best spot to go to?
Yeah.
What's the name of it?
It's called Medea from Scratch.
Okay. All right.
And they have an outstanding menu, a beautiful patio for outdoor dining when the weather permits in Texas. So really an outstanding place.
All right. I'm going to have to hit that spot when we go out to Dallas. You may be immune to all of this because you've covered the Cowboys for so long, but I've listened to you for a long time, but the last couple of weeks, and many others talk about kind of what a circus this is. How would you describe what has played out with McCarthy and Jerry Jones not getting on the same page, and now it looks like they'll move to Brian Schottenheimer / maybe Jason Witten and so on? How would you describe what's taken place the last couple of weeks, Ed?
It's just the usual organizational chaos and dysfunction on display. I think, even though the Cowboys went into this season knowing that Mike McCarthy and his entire coaching staff were being forced to work the final year of their contracts and they might have to conduct a coaching search depending on how the season finished, they seemed so ill-prepared for this. And that leads me to the conclusion that Jerry Jones underestimated Mike McCarthy's resolve to be paid fairly and to feel like he had a full commitment from the Cowboys front office. And when they failed to make him that sort of offer, or to make it apparent to him that kind of offer would not be forthcoming, that he decided to take his chances and pursue other opportunities. He interviewed with the Bears, and we're expecting he's going to interview eventually here with the Saints, where he started his offensive play calling career long ago. But yeah, I mean, it's to go through this process and never, as a Dallas Cowboys franchise, interview the assistant coaches who seem like everybody else in the league wants a shot at them. The Cowboys don't even talk to Ben Johnson or Aaron Glenn, who played for the organization under Bill Parcells. It just doesn't make sense. And the public and the fan base, which was somewhat apathetic last year from the beginning of the season when they went to training camp and there weren't nearly as many fans at the Oxnard, California practices, and then the final game of the season where there are a lot of empty seats. The fan base is approaching the stage of just being outraged, and you almost wonder if Jerry can actually do this. Can he actually promote Brian Schottenheimer, a 25-year assistant who's never been a head coach before, or does he, wait and see what happens with Kellen Moore?
As you and I, or when you discuss with your colleagues and so on, people inside, outside the organization, that Jerry missed the window because of what played out with Mike McCarthy to talk to Ben Johnson or Aaron Glenn or whoever, or even Vrabel, even though you would think Vrabel would have gone with the Patriots because of the tie, but still a sit-down. My question would be, because he refuses to pay a head coach at the championship level, I mean, Sean Payton was making $17 million, as you know, Ed, in his last year with the New Orleans Saints several years ago, and that's a small market team. But because Jerry won't pay, would it have mattered anyway, Ed?
Well, Jerry has never believed in that it was necessary to pay a head coach, and he certainly doesn't believe that's necessary with the visibility of a franchise like the Dallas Cowboys. And he seems to be missing the argument that the Dallas Cowboys is not perceived the way it once was among coaches and players. But I think the bigger impediment is probably the way the organizational structure is set up, and that some things are irreversible in terms of Jerry's influence and involvement, that they don't have a traditional general manager, that the owner is the general manager, that the owner is a very public figure in terms of having radio shows during the week where he talks about strategies and the injury updates injuries, and then, like, I don't know if you know this, but certainly after every home game, Jerry walks out of the locker room where he usually stands and listens to the coach address the team following a win or a loss. He walks out 20 steps and stands at the entrance to the locker room and is available to the media for, 20 minutes sometimes 40 minutes. And so you're forced to choose, well, do I go into the locker room and talk to, Dak Prescott, CeeDee Lamb, and Micah Parsons, or do I go down the hallway and make sure I, meet with the head coach and Mike McCarthy or whoever it is, or do you talk to Jerry? Well, most people talk to Jerry because he's the one who makes all the decisions.
Sure.
And he's the one who generally is the most honest, whether he should be or shouldn't be. But the fact that he has so much power forces you to talk to him rather than the players or the head coach. And that's just a circumstance that, most coaches don't want to tolerate if they have other options. And then you add on top of that, you're not going to be well paid. I think it's all detrimental. I think everybody knows how different this organization is. And if they have other options, they're going to pursue those first.
NFL insider Ed Werder on the Out of Bounds show, driven by your next Ford F-150 truck at Mack Haik Ford. He joins us on the Farm Bureau Insurance guest line. As many people as you know, and as long as you've covered the NFL, do you think people eye roll and laugh around the league at what you just and throw in hey, Brian, we want you to be the next head coach, but you have to hire Jason Witten. Do you think people just chuckle and laugh around the league, Ed?
Well, that's the other question that I have about why McCarthy walked away and why there's been so little interest in this job to this point is the Jason Witten factor. And for those who don't know, obviously one of the most accomplished players in franchise history, a guy that is almost like Jerry and his family did a photo shoot for a cookbook during one of their earlier seasons, and the entire Jones family is pictured there with Witten. Witten is on the cover of this thing, and there's a huge picture above the entrance from the locker room to the indoor practice facility that depicts Witten with his helmet off, that famous play in Philadelphia where his helmet got knocked off and he continued to run down the field for like 20 yards against the Eagles. That picture has been up there even when he was still a player, which a lot of players felt an aversion to because it suggested that he had a unique place, in the organization with the ownership, and he wasn't totally trusted in the locker room for that. Now, he may be eventually a great coach. He's won a couple of titles with a small private school in Argyle outside of Dallas. But to what degree is Jerry mandating that as a precondition to anybody taking this job, Jason Witten has to be on the staff? Did he propose that to McCarthy and only offer him a, say, 2-year contract, to which Mike McCarthy would obviously recognize he has no real job security, and that in a year or less he's going to be in the same circumstance he just completed working the last year of his contract, except this time the next head coach is on his coaching staff. And he may have already felt the experience that with Kellen Moore when he inherited Kellen Moore, a former Cowboys quarterback who began his coaching career in Dallas, and Jerry forced him on McCarthy as the play caller. McCarthy eventually won that power struggle and took back play calling, and Moore left the organization, going to the Chargers and now the Eagles. But to what degree is Jason Witten a factor in all of this? I don't believe his name was mentioned to Kellen Moore. when he did his Zoom interview with the Cowboys. But I know it was mentioned to McCarthy that there were scenarios when McCarthy was first hired 5 years ago where Jerry was going to have Witten on the staff, and for obvious reasons, McCarthy rejected that at the time. I mean, the Cowboys have done this once before. They did it with Jason Garrett. They hired Jason Garrett with an unknown title and an unknown coaching position on the next coaching staff, and then hired Wade Phillips as the head coach. And people, that whole era was all about the power struggle between the two of them. That Wade knew it was a temporary situation. He knew Jason Garrett was going to replace him eventually, and it was sort of like they had a head coach of offense and a head coach of defense, and nobody leading the overall team. And eventually, obviously, Wade Phillips became the first head coach Jerry Jones ever fired during a season, and he was replaced by Jason Garrett. So all these coaches have seen this scenario play out before. And I talked to one head coach who, to me, should have been one of the top candidates here when they decided to make a change. And I said to this coach, I said, hey, if you come here for an interview, be prepared to answer the question whether you're willing to include Jason Witten on your coaching staff, because I think Jerry Jones might make that a precondition. And this coach said to me, if he wants Jason Witten, then he should hire Jason Witten. In other words, I ain't coming there and having some owner tell me that one of his former players has to be on my staff.
I feel like Zeke Elliott, he'll ask, the next head coach to make him the running backs coach. We're visiting with
starting running back.
Right. Ed Werder, longtime NFL insider on the Farm Bureau Insurance Guest Line. All right, so I'm biased because I'm a huge Dak Prescott fan, and I actually believe that he's won despite Jerry and Steven. And has he needed to do some things? Absolutely, but he's had some unbelievable seasons and games. Look, he's getting paid at a high level. They could have gotten the thing done last March, and they don't really do anything in free agency.
Yep.
How do you look at Dak's run in Dallas? And one of the Cowboys insiders last week, David Hellman, said they don't create any advantages for Dak and the team in the offseason because that's just not how they're set up. What is your reaction to that, Ed?
Well, I think it's preposterous that Jerry Jones waited until game day, week one, to sign Dak Prescott and make him the highest paid player in the entire league on game day. Like, if Jerry had waited 4 more hours, he would have had to use one of McCarthy's timeouts in the middle of the game to go down from the owner's suite and sign Dak on the sideline. And it was the same thing with CeeDee Lamb. Like, they didn't sign CeeDee Lamb, even though they knew what the market was for wide receivers until, training camp was over, and he missed all of it. And CeeDee Lamb has eventually said, that lack of time in the off season and in the OTAs and at training camp between me and Dak really affected our chemistry and my performance early in the year. And then after the last game, Jerry's not apologizing at all for the timing of it and suggesting he'd do the same thing all over again. And that doesn't matter. That doesn't affect players. I mean, just totally contradicts what the player himself said based on the experience he just had. But I think this coaching hire, and every indication is that they're following this, I think this coaching hire is all about Dak Prescott. It's got to be looked at like this is probably the last head coach we're going to hire for Dak Prescott when he's in the potential prime of his career. And now you got to recognize where Dak is physically. I mean, he's going to be in his age 32 season. He's coming off a second season where he suffered a major leg injury requiring surgery. He's not going to be a very mobile player. He's capable of extending plays, but he's basically going to have to work from within the pocket. And I thought that's what the allure of Ben Johnson, quite honestly, would be. I think the Cowboys have to stop seeing, Dak Prescott as Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes, even though that's the level they're paying him at, and they need to see him more as Jared Goff. Like, let's get him under center. Let's run play action pass. Let's support him with a strong running game. Like, that's the quarterback Dak Prescott is capable of being the next, 4 or 5 years as he plays as the NFL's highest paid player. And the fact that they haven't, he has not played well in the postseason. He's got one of the biggest differentials in terms of winning percentage in the regular season and the playoffs. I think only Darryl LaMonica and Lamar Jackson have worse numbers in that regard. So he hasn't played his best. But I think part of it, and talking to head coaches, like they view it as the Cowboys put too much on Dak Prescott in the playoffs, and he hasn't proven capable in those situations of elevating his teammates on a consistent basis, and that they need to create a better team around him. And I think that's true. I think it's all about this coaching hire has to be for Dak Prescott. Who's going to make the most? Who's going to get the most out of him? Is that Brian Schottenheimer? You can certainly make that argument internally. Is it Kellen Moore? Great history with Dak, and that seems to be the direction they're going. But yeah, I don't blame Dak entirely, but I think it's obvious that he hasn't played his best, and now he's a more limited player at the quarterback position than ever before. And if you look at the four guys in the NFC and AFC championship game starting at quarterback, all four of them, rushed for over 300 yards.
Yeah.
So that's a big part of the modern, game at the quarterback position right now.
No question. In fact, I thought Jason Garrett wasted. I thought they should have run him more those first three. We watched him at Mississippi State. Yeah. We were in Starkville all the time. I thought, and when I say that, Ed, I don't mean 15 more carries a game, but I thought that those first 3 years, especially out of the gate, year one, that they overcoached him to stay in the pocket, and they should have allowed him to run a little bit more, like you're referencing with Josh and Lamar and Mahomes. I loved what you said on the Musers, and you just framed it up in that, kind of surround him like Jared Goff. Dan Campbell and Ben Johnson have done a hell of a job in Detroit. And anybody can lose, as you well know, covering the NFL for over 30 years in the playoffs, but they've done a great job with Goff. All right. You also said within, I don't remember when, the last couple of months, and I don't remember what show you were on, that, hey, guys, nothing's going to change. I mean, Jerry is going to be the general manager until he passes away. So we're almost just, we shouldn't expect anything different as far as the way they work, this head coaching hire or free agency or anything else. In other words, Ed, as long as you've known Jerry and as long as you've covered him, you don't expect anything different the next 5, 6, 7 months, do you?
I don't think he's going to change his organizational philosophy. Could he be persuaded to be more active in free agency? I think that's a fair a point to make to him in an area where he could modify their approach. I mean, they got burned, early on in free agency, and Stephen Jones, Jerry's son, always talks about, you're paying top level prices for players at the start of free agency who just don't merit that. And they've generally sat that out. I mean, 3 of the last 4 years, they were the last team to sign a veteran free agent. And last year that happened, even though they watched at home in horror their team lose to the Green Bay Packers, a young, inexperienced playoff team, and lose badly in a game they never led at home. And then instead of improving the roster, they let starting players walk out the door who are now in the NFC Championship game with Dan Quinn, and Washington. I mean, this is a nightmare for Jerry. You've got the NFC Championship game includes 2 teams in the NFC East, and the Cowboys didn't even make the playoffs. And both teams are significantly influenced by Cowboys personnel. There's 7 coaches, including Kellen Moore, calling plays for the Eagles, and Dan Quinn, who was their defensive coordinator. They were all on the staff together with Mike McCarthy 2 years ago. And now these 2 teams are deciding which one's going to go to the Super Bowl, and the Cowboys, experience now the longest playoff or NFC Championship game drought of any team in the division, in the conference. Jerry's got to change something, and that, to me, is something he can change. And that does need to change. You need to give your coach, whoever it is, and your quarterback, Dak Prescott, you're committed to him. You need to give him a better opportunity to succeed by creating a better roster. Mm-hmm. And that's the responsibility of Jerry Jones. And he can change that. He's not going to change some of the other things he's going to do. He's going to be public. He's going to be the most visible person in the organization. And that's why he probably won't hire Deion Sanders or even grant him an official interview. Like, nobody could create more interest in the Cowboys than Deion Sanders and Jerry, but the stage will be bigger than ever, but it'll belong more to Deion than to Jerry, and I just don't see Jerry doing that. So he's got to act in the best interest of his team and take the roster building part of it seriously. And a big part of that is free agency. They can be selective, but they need to get players in that aspect of player acquisition to benefit their team. And they haven't done that.
Oh. Well, that was a ton of fun. Ed Werder, longtime NFL, ESPN insider on the Farm Bureau Insurance guest line. Ed, we appreciate the time today and look forward to catching up again soon.
Sounds good. Thanks so much for having me on. Have a great day. Enjoy these final playoff games to determine who goes to the Super Bowl.
Yeah, it's going to be a blast on Sunday. He is Ed Werder, NFL insider, and that was brought to you by your next Ford Explorer. Ford F-150, Mack Hike Ford, I-55 North in Jackson. Don't forget that there's 5 Mack Hike dealerships in the Jackson metro area. We're ESPN 105.9 The Zone. Okay, so he said, look, Jerry's not going to change most everything that he's doing. However, maybe someone can convince Jerry Jones to get a little more active in free agency to help his team, his head coach, whoever we think it's going to be, Brian Schottenheimer, and Dak Prescott. Other teams do it. And again, you don't have to sell out and go get 15 players. Remember when Belichick did that late in his career and just went nuts and signed like $150 million plus worth of players? That's not going to work. However, it's kind of like the transfer portal for Georgia and Bama and some of these other Ohio State. They're going to add 4 to 6 players that could be the difference on your hunt for the college football playoff berth and to, advance and so on. That was fun. Ed Werder on the Out of Bounds show talking Jerry Jones and the Cowboys. Can you imagine what a circus that is? I mean, Ed just made a great point. He can't hire Deion Sanders because Deion would steal the spotlight from Jerry Jones. Jerry goes on sports talk radio shows every week. And then after the game, he holds court, even more so than Mike McCarthy and Dak Prescott. He's in the locker room, then he steps outside the locker room, and then he just talks. Incredible. I mean, that doesn't happen with the Hunt family. That doesn't happen with Jeffrey Lurie. Or
you don't know what any of those people look like.
No.
But the public has no idea what they
Miss
look like.
Benson doesn't do that.
No idea what she looks like.
No. So, Brian Schottenheimer, offensive coordinator in name only. He has been an OC, though, in the NFL for years. So he has been a play caller. He was not in Dallas because McCarthy took over the play calling when Kellen Moore went to the Philadelphia Eagles. 7 assistant coaches, roughly, in the NFC that coached in Dallas in the NFC Championship game between the Commanders and the Eagles. Both those teams are in the division with the Cowboys. Oh. And man, did Jason Garrett waste an opportunity to not run in Dak Prescott more early. That drove me nuts the first couple of seasons when he had those fresh legs coming right out of Mississippi State. We're live in the Bank Plus studio. Jack Bourgeois, Key City craft beer man, will join us in about 20 minutes on the show. We're streaming live on the Out of Bounds radio app and the zone1059.com. Straight ahead, Rebs and Dogs on the road this weekend in hoops. We'll discuss.